Every Pokemon has an origin, from the simple origins of Tyrantrum from the T-Rex to the more intricate Ceruledge and El Cantar de Miocid. I handpicked 10 Pokemon that I'd love to talk about in great detail. Their origins ranging from the Singing Sands to Sun Wukong, connecting the inspirations and speculating on more possibilities for existing and future Pokemon. Howdy there, I'm Krillic, and I'm not going to cover every single little thing about every Pokemon and the myth, but I will cover as follows: the Pokemon name, the myth or story they're based on, how that ties into Pokemon, and of course I'm going to share in my own thoughts because I have Golden Retriever brain and there's no way that I'm not going to do that. So with that then, all sources are included in the description below so that way you can read the full stories and bits of information that I pulled this from. First on the docket, we have Infernape and Sun Wukong. Stories of not only Sun Wukong, but also the Indian tale of Hanuman in reality. So Infernape being a monkey with chimpanzee elements alongside these gold embellishments that it has on its body. We'll talk about that more later. Skilled in combat with its own fighting style, quick on its feet, and even wearing a crown of flames upon its head that never goes out. Now, again, we'll touch back on these details a little bit more later. Let's get into the myth or story of Sun Wukong. Wait, before we continue, not only can you support the channel by becoming a member, you can also get your hands on some beautiful merchandise on the Teespring in the description below. And if you want to get your hands on voice mod at a nice little discount, you can make your voice heard in a number of different ways. Why just let your voice be this
when you can spruce it up just a little bit and make yourself just that much more fancy?
You can use it on Discord with your friends or even in games, as they are nice and compatible. I've used it many times during my streams, and through the link in the description below, you, with the use of code KRILLIC, can get 5% off and support the channel as some of that money gets kicked back to me. Now back to the video. Sun Wukong started off as an immortal rhesus macaque demon. I really hope YouTube doesn't immediately crack on that because I said a certain word. It's not a word, it's a word in a word. Anywho, extraordinary power via spiritual cultivation and rebels against the primacy of heaven. Kind of sick if I gotta be honest. Just this monkey that's like, yeah, you see that guy right there? I don't like you, and I don't like how you're running things. It's interesting. It's just, you know, whatever. It's kind of funny that a monkey does it. But, so, they're considered a trickster god that falls from grace when Buddha banishes him to an earthly prison below. They repent, become a monk, and agree to use their abilities to protect a Buddhist priest on his journey to collect sutras from India. These sutras are basically just scriptures. Now that you know the overview of it, let's get into those intricate details now that you know what's coming up. Born from a stone egg upon the mountain of flowers and fruit, this creature gets out of the egg, bows in the 4 cardinal directions as bright light shines from its eyes that is so powerful that it reaches the heavens. Now, that light actually ends up fading the moment it ingests its first bite of food. To me, that just signifies mortality. When you think of mortality, what do you think of? You think of breathing, you think of eating, drinking, needing to do these things, maybe defecating. I don't really know. Look, we spend a lot of time on the toilet. I don't know how much time we spend. I know there's somebody in the comments that's gonna know just how much on average we spend on the toilet. Now, over time, this stone monkey that does not have a name yet proves itself by blindingly leaping through a waterfall and discovering a long forgotten mortal's cave, becoming the king of the other primates. As he gets older, he begins to fear death and is encouraged to seek the secrets to immortal life. And so, he travels west, which is where we get the actual story, Journey to the West. That might sound very familiar to some of you who may have watched Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball even for that matter. And as the story develops, you're gonna start to hear a lot of similarities, not just for Infernape eventually, but Goku. Upon reaching the Western continent, he is accepted as a student under Buddha Taoist sage Subodhi and given the religious name Sun Wukong. So he finally gets his name, which actually means monkey awakened to emptiness, also meaning monkey who realizes sunyata. Now, I have read a number of like just Zen teachings in my own time. They are, honestly, some of them are how I make up who I am as a person and how I treat other people. And a lot of Zen teaching or Buddhist teaching, at least to my knowledge, I am not an expert on it, ended up boiling around like emptiness and understanding and balance, and it's so interesting. I highly recommend just looking into it because it's got a number of intricate details. Some of them are really funny, honestly, because there is some comedy in it, and it's okay to laugh because they are written in a certain way to elicit different types of emotion. With his time, he learned the 72 methods of earthly transformation, endless ways of changing his size and shape. What? How many transformations is Goku at now? What? He's got Super Saiyan, Super Duper Saiyan, Super Saiyan 2, 3, 4, technically, if you look at GT, red, blue, not a green, let that be for Broly, Ultra Instinct, Sign, Ultra Instinct, and then you get into Vegeta, who also has his own stuff. So, again, the transformation thing for Goku. We haven't really fully touched on stuff for Infernape just yet, other than Monkey. So, we'll get there. But he also learns cloud somersaulting. Basically, he can just travel 33,554 miles or 54,000 kilometers in a single leap. All I could think about is the guy from Skyrim, not Skyrim, I'm sorry, the guy from Morrowind, and you're walking down the path and you just hear, and the guy just slams down in front of you, gone. And then you have 3 scrolls that do the same exact thing that he used. Yeah, that's bad. Well, now Sun Wukong doesn't just have this leaping ability, and yes, he can actually survive it, of course, but also has the ability to, let's say, call forth gods and spirits, grow to any size, part fire and water, create impassable barriers, conjure windstorms, cast illusions, freeze people in place, make endless clones of himself, unlock any lock, bestow superhuman strength, bring the dead back to life, traditional medicine, armed and unarmed martial arts, and, here's the big kicker, an internal breathing method that results in immortality. That last one is really interesting to me because, like, I mean, let's talk about oxidation and the idea that everything oxidizes and that technically you're slowly dying because you're breathing and so on and so forth. It's whatever, you know what I mean? Your cells are replaced all the time anyway. So the idea that you can just have internal breathing, you're not having to bring in new oxygen, shouldn't really change that necessarily, but it stops you from needing external oxygen, external air. You can be self-sufficient. I didn't see anything that said, oh, he doesn't have to eat, he doesn't have to drink, but, I mean, I could believe it if, like, they said it, just be like, yeah, he doesn't need to breathe, so, I mean, he might as well not even need to eat or drink for that matter, so there's a little bit there. Continuing on with the story, Sun Wukong returns back home to kill the demon that terrorized his people in his absence. Then he just kind of sits there and goes, you know what sounds pretty good right now? I don't know why he is not supposed to have a southern accent. That makes zero sense whatsoever. You know what sounds real good right now? I need a weapon. I need a weapon that matches my celestial power. And so he goes and decides that he's going to visit the home of the past Dragon King of the Eastern Sea, where he ultimately picks up the 9-ton iron pillar, which can expand and contract at his whim. That should sound familiar. And because he's also sitting there going, you know what? You're brothers of the dragon. I want armor. And they're like, no, we're not. You already we let you try out all these weapons. And now you want more? No, you're fine. We've already given you stuff. He goes, I want it. And he bullies them straight out. Shit, just bullies the brothers of the Dragon King of the Eastern Sea until they give him armor. And now we can start talking about Infernape just a little bit, because I want you to think about Infernape and how it looks. Kind of looks like he's wearing, or it's wearing, armor. Those golden pieces on its body where like joints would be, on the elbows, on the knees, and then even like a band across the back leading to the chest like a chest plate. Okay, I'll remind you of that later. Let's continue on with our story. Sun Wukong returns home, lives his life, and just exists. And one day, while he's resting away atop the hill mountain, he gets dragged to the afterlife. The spirits, psychopomps, which are people who guide spirits into the afterlife, try to take him. Just whoop, take him away, really. And he gets incredibly upset and goes, yo, I did all this effort, I learned internal breathing and all this stuff to become immortal, and you're telling me I still have to be here? Why am I dead? What is wrong? This is not fair. And you know, they're like, whoa, you were supposed to die here at this age, at this time. Really makes me feel like it's some, Final Destination type stuff, where it's like, oh, you avoided death, that's cute. You can't avoid death. You will ruin the life cycle. You're not allowed to do it. We need the balance. And Sun Wukong sits down and goes, I don't care, and bullies the king of hell until he gets to give him the ledger that says everyone's names. Reminds you of King Yema? I know I keep going back to Dragon Ball, but it's a fun story, and it does relate to Dragon Ball a lot, and Infernape has that connection as well, at least in terms of, like, you know, they're both Sun Wukong. It's fun, and I mean, even Goku. The King of Hell shows him the ledger, and Sun Wukong goes, just crosses off his name, right? Not only does he cross off his own name, he crosses off all of his monkeys' names, making them all immortal. And then, his soul returns to his body, okay? So, like, I find that really funny, that there's just a ledger where your name is, you could just cross off your name and you're immortal. As simple as that. What's stopping you from rewriting the name down? Whatever. I mean, it's part of the story. It's fun. I'm loving this, right? You know, like I said, I read as much as I could, or at least like a well-detailed synopsis, not the full exact story itself, right? I am going to paraphrase this next part as much as I can, as it does start to get a little bit crazy here. And honestly, there's just so much potential for what could happen with Infernape. I mean, we'll talk about that later. I'm trying to stay as focused as possible with this. Heaven gets angry. Hell is like, hey, we need help. This guy just threw everything off whack. He is immortal. His monkeys, his family, his clan, they're immortal. Could you guys, like, do something? This isn't looking super good. And they're like, got you. Watch this. At first, Heaven tries to employ Sun Wukong. It's like, hey, we get it. You're immortal now. You did some great things. We're gonna work with you. How about this? You work with us. We work with you. And you get a nice little title. You get a nice little title. And Sun Wukong basically sitting there going, yeah, sure, why not? I'll work for Heaven. I want to be the guy who conquered Heaven. And they go, yeah, oh, yeah, sure, go do work, whatever. Not really giving him the title, and he slowly realizes, like, I'm not your busboy, and decides not to work for Heaven, right? Heaven gets pissed and assembles the armies, and they battle, right? And Sun Wukong is just absolutely whipping the generals of Heaven until he turns around and, like in a classic action movie, he sees his loved ones captured. His loved ones, while yes, he could bestow upon them super strength and all these other things, they're not impervious, and they're not as powerful as Sun Wukong. So he surrenders, and the generals and everybody sit down and they try to kill him, but he's impervious to their attacks, to what they can do. And so, like, all right, fine, into the furnace with you. And so they throw him into a furnace for 49 days. They're like, yeah, I think it's cooked now. let's go ahead and open the furnace. Let's make sure he's all good and cooked. And the second they open it up, out jumps Sun Wukong alive. This boy had the power of wind on his side, moving the heat and fire so that way he would not actually be burned. But the cinders and the smoke affected his eyes, now changing them to be this golden color, allowing him to see through the disguise of demons. He then decides to overturn the furnace and begins wreaking havoc in heaven all over again. And the generals and everybody's like, oh, this is bad. Like, this is really bad. Hey, Buddha, can you help us here? Can you do something? And once again, we get a, we got you, homie. And Buddha decides to speak to Sun Wukong and make a deal. And he goes, basically, if you can jump from my hand, if you can jump out of my reach, then you can be the king of heaven. Sun Wukong, this mischievous, cocky monkey, all super incredibly powerful, creature that has defeated everybody in his path and is not going to shy away from a challenge, says, bet, preps himself. It's like, all right. And he leaps. And he goes. And he's flying. He jumped with all of his might and goes. And he reaches what is expected to be the outer edge of the universe. All that is left are 5 pillars. And he walks over to them and he pees on them. I'm not even remotely kidding. He straight up pees on them. There is no, he just and gone. You know what I mean? So, jumps back. He wasn't wearing pants. Either way, jumps back, right? And looks to the heavens and is like, all right, Buddha, I beat you. I did it. What now? I am the king of heaven. And Buddha goes, yo, man, those are my fingers. You just peed on my fingers. And Buddha plucks up Sun Wukong in his stupor and imprisons him. 600 years later, he is released as an escort to the Buddhist monk, Sripitaka. I don't know if I said that name right. Forgive me, please. Given a golden headband to rein in Sun Wukong's unruly nature. Seem familiar with Infernape? Crown of Flames? And from there, he teams with other demons that are kind of turning a new leaf, battles all sorts of ghosts and demons and monsters, and in the end reaches Buddhahood, given the title Victorious Fighting Buddha for his success. Now, I also want to go over the story of Hanuman before we fully return to Infernape. Interestingly enough, while the stories overall are very different, they have very similar beats. Hanuman's tale originates from India, and Hanuman is born half monkey to a king and one of his wives who was a monkey. Now, they worship the wind god Vayu with great renown. They gave, what they could. Their sorts of, I don't want to say tithes. I can't think of a proper word. I don't want to say sacrifice because I don't want it to sound bad. I think tithe might technically be the right word to use here. And the wind god Vayu was like, yo, good job. I like this. I love your respect. How about this? And through a little bit of here and there, the child is born, and the wind god Vayu takes them in as their own. And so, Hanuman is now considered a god. And here's where, again, the beats get similar. Hanuman reaches for the sun, thinking it's a ripe fruit one day, and gets struck down by the king of gods, Indra, via lightning bolt. Hanuman is now dead, banished down to earth, with a broken jaw. Hanuman originally meaning disfigured jaw. Now, Vayu gets sad and leaves, and because they're like the wind god, that means oxygen is depleting from everything, and all creatures suffered. Eventually, Hanuman is brought back to life, and the other gods assist in this, giving Hanuman new abilities and powers. Now, Hanuman, having been struck by lightning, is now just as powerful as Indra itself. Fire and water also can't hurt him. He was as fast as the wind and held similar powers to Sun Wukong, including the changing of size. Now, there is a point in Sun Wukong sequels where he does actually go to India, interestingly enough. But back to Hanuman, who also played pranks on others still, to the point where he played a prank on an old man, and the old man cursed him, and to my knowledge, that old man was mortal, so I don't know who this old man is or why they have that power, but... And overall, as the story went on, he wasn't aware of his powers anymore. He, that was what the curse was. Eventually, wars broke out against demons, and the story goes on very similarly in the basic general concept to Sun Wukong, minus the traveling to the west. Now, the most important part of the Hanuman tale that relates to Infernape would be the point where Hanuman was captured. And I quote, Vibhishana was instructed by Ravana to set Hanuman's tail on fire and parade him around the streets of Lanka. Lord Agnadeva was urged not to harm Hanuman by Sita. Before leaping from a building to combine them, Hanuman decided to have some fun and shook free the rope. Lanka's entire city was soon on fire. So that was Hanuman against demon devil generals. And that tail on fire thing kind of relates back to Infernape. Now, honestly, interesting stories, both of them, that I could tell were intentionally written not only to give lessons, but also just kind of give a laugh here or there. As I mentioned previously, these stories are very... They're written to elicit emotions, and while they are also a belief, they're still here to entertain, give those lessons, and try to build on people's character while also teaching them stories and basis with religion. Now, let's look back at Infernape. We've talked about Infernape's appearance, but let's bring it up again. You have the crown upon its head of flame, similar to when Sun Wukong was brought back and given a crown. We have gold embellishments where the joints are throughout Infernape's body. Even that white fur seems like a body armor of sorts separate from the rest of it. And the chest plates that it has as well. Again, very similar to armor. They have a fiery nature and the will to take on any opponent. Again, placing back to Sun Wukong. And their fire never goes out, which could be symbolic of immortality because fire is often associated with life. Now, the idea of the fire never going out could also relate to the idea that, hey, fire doesn't affect you, or water will not extinguish your flame, so there is the resistances there, even though Infernape is not resistant to water, I know. And Infernape is also known to confound its opponents with its speed. Now, I'll also mention, there might also be a reference here overall to monkey kung fu, and there is a fighting style called monkey boxing, which is named after Sun Wukong. Exactly as it sounds, with ape/monkey-like movement as part of the fighting technique. Overall, when we look at the design of Infernape and some of its Pokédex entries, we can see these connections, strong or even tiny little ones, that tie in really nicely. And these are just great stories, and honestly, I think it would be pretty cool. Let's take Infernape and the idea of a transformation. If there are 72 earthly transformations, there is always the chance, and I can cross my fingers, maybe Legends ZA might give Infernape a mega form. Maybe there'll just be an alternate Infernape of sorts. Even if it's just a regional variant, it would make sense, and there's a lot of opportunity here, especially if they take Infernape, give it the mega, and it has from those joints and the chest plate, those extend, giving Infernape full armor. You don't need to give it the power pole of sorts, but it would be really cool. With that though, let's move on to Pokemon number 2. Ceruledge and Cantar de Miocid, the Ghost Knight wannabe Proto Man itself. I love this Pokemon. But brief overview first, then into the myths. Black and purple armor filled with grudges and a flame from the eyes and the top of the head that burns out alongside 2 swords for arms that can grow into full great swords. Fueled by fire and ghost energy, more specifically, the lingering regrets of the deceased. Merciless, willing to do anything to win, and stealer of life energy. Now, into the myth. Or rather, let's get into the real story and the myth, because there's something important to keep in mind here. There's the Cantar, and then there's the real story of El Cid. Just like many other stories, there's a real historical figure and a literary figure. So let's discuss both. El Cid, or rather, Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar El Cid Campeador, the Battler. Spanish medieval hero par excellence. Prominent member of the court of Castile during the short reign of Sancho II the Strong, from 1065 to 1072. Unfortunately, there was an accident on the frontier of Toledo that caused his exile in the year 1081. Now, they were in service of the Moorish king, and it's time for a tangent. Now, I have to admit, I thought Moor was inherently a very bad word, so I almost just didn't write it, didn't say it, didn't include it, so on and so forth. But considering that it was written on a site that I feel like I can trust, that is accounting for history, I wanted to look into it more. So I did a little bit extra research here, and here's the quick and clean info on it. I say quick as if I'm not going to talk about it for the next 5 whole minutes. Originally, this word wasn't rooted in racism. The understanding of how it became this way is as follows. Now, I quote this from Madi Blaine, a Moroccan-Algerian candidate for a master's degree in anthropology and Middle Eastern studies at New York University, who had looked into this info and presented this. Blaine first presented his findings and ideas around Moorish depictions 2 years ago. He said that at the time, he sought to offer a coherent narrative of the Moors and the imagery associated with their perceived identities. After deepening his understanding of the anthropological concepts and theories tied into the construction of race and power, he realized that the definition of Moors is intentionally vague and arbitrary. That's where racism gets its power. It's not supposed to be logical, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have a rationality. Blaine identifies the rationale as privy to attempts to reconcile with otherness that inspires narratives used to uphold power. In other words, thank you, racism, for ruining yet another word, or bigots for that matter. I'm not afraid to say it here. I don't care. I'll stand on my soapbox for a couple of seconds. Ooh. Anywho, you know what? I'll even fight the people who decided that they wanted to ruin the word dank, because I would love... I laughed anyway. I couldn't hold it in. I would love to describe sewers as dank, dark, and wet like I should, but I can't say the word with a straight face. I laugh almost every single time. So, I mean, I'm just going off on that. But anywho, tangent's over. So the real Cantar de Mio Cid, or rather, the real Rodrigo Diaz, defended the territory against his brother and against the Count of Barcelona. Oh, I wrote defeated, and I'm like, what is that supposed to mean? It's defeated. I have a typo here. I'm keeping that in the video. He defeated them both, then was sent to the eastern coast to protect the interests of the Castile, and was exiled again by the king. Then he was just like, you know what, I'm done. I'm waging more on my own account, buddy. And he conquered Valencia in 1094, where he then passed away in 1099. Now, let's get into the Cantar de Mio Cid. This is the exaggeration of his tale, and let's just go over definitions real quick. I get ahead of myself. I apologize. I get excited because it's great and I'm happy. Well, I'm not apologizing for that. I take my apology back. A cantar is a poem consisting of 4-line stanzas, each line having 8 syllables. Now, this translates to the poem of the Cid, oldest Spanish poem preserved and takes place during the Spanish Reconquest. It tells the story of El Cid and his adventures during his exile. Now, the cantar does revolve around the restoration of lost honor multiple times. Basically, the idea is that he goes about what he's doing, he loses his honor, Zuko, it's just going through my head, and then reclaims his honor, but the new honor is much stronger, greater than the one that he had lost. And this happens again multiple times. So these I am going to quote directly once again for their synopses. The first song tells of the adventures of the hero in exile in the region of Alcaria, I've stumbled on that, and the Halon and Hiloka valleys, where he obtains his booty and taxes from the Muslim population. The second song focuses on the conquest of Valencia and the reconciliation between El Cid and King Alfonso, and ends with the wedding of his daughters to two noblemen from the royal court, the Dauphins of Carrion. The third song tells how the cowardice of the Dauphins leads to them being scorned by El Cid's men and their departure from Valencia with their wives, whom they mistreat and abandon in the oak forest of Corpes. El Cid brings a complaint before King Alfonso, who summons the court in Toledo, where the battler challenges the Dauphins. During the duel in Carrion, the Dauphins and their elder brother are disgraced, while the Princess of Navarre and Aragon ask for the hand of El Cid's daughters, and he finally sees them happily wed as they deserve. Next, we have the swords, Tizona y Colada, prize swords of the real Rodrigo Diaz, distinguished by the design on their hilts, or rather the design of their hilts in general, forged from Damascus steel, which I had to look into, and what I found, as per quoting, though there was a demand for Damascus steel, in the 19th century it stopped being made. This steel had been produced for 11 centuries, and in just about a generation, the means of its manufacture was entirely lost. The idea of using the Damascus steel meant that these swords, according to history, could be sharpened to their finest quality. And finally, you might be drawing some connections here or there between the myth and legend and Ceruledge, but allow me to explain to you, or at least give you a piece of information that might explain why Ceruledge is a ghost. The legend of El Cid is as follows. In the 1961 production of El Cid, featuring Charlton Heston, the wife of El Cid is depicted as strapping his body to his horse and sending it back into battle, fearing that his troops would become demoralized upon learning of his death. The soldiers, thinking that their leader was riding to fight beside them, rallied once more. The opposing army was so afraid of what looked to be an invincible fighter that they retreated to their boats. Thus, El Cid is said to have won his final battle, even after his death. Though, in fact, El Cid died peacefully at Valencia years after its conquest, being in June of 1094, his death being in 1099. The story of his being strapped to a horse after his death has some basis in other legends regarding his death and burial, which may be found in the Historia de Cardena. So I think that's, I think it's just cool. All right, let's just stop for a moment. I'm throwing a lot of information at you. Let's take a breath here, and let's just talk about how sick that is. Where he's just like, that is something that we see in so many different stories of a fallen soldier or general. Heck, I've seen it in Castlevania, and it's just that moment of dedication of, this is it. I'm going to die, but I will not. I refuse even to fail my mission, my purpose. I will succeed over my dead body. And that's why it's a legend. It's amazing. Because that potentially what is argued the most important battle was won even after he died. Broski got a kill from the grave. Like kill assists from the grave. I propose to you the rest of the details that links this Pokemon to El Cantar de mi Cid. Let's look at its dex entries. The fiery blades on its arms burn fiercely with the lingering resentment of a sword wielder who fell before accomplishing their goal. And an old set of armor steeped in grudges caused this Pokemon's evolution. Ceruledge cuts its enemies to pieces without mercy. We can also look at its signature move, Bitter Blade. The user focuses its bitter feelings towards the world of the living into a slashing attack. Ceruledge is a wandering spirit. A wraith, if you would. A wraith is a type of ghost or spirit. Wraiths were traditionally said to be the embodiment of souls who are either on the verge of death or who have recently passed on. In modern times, the concept of a wraith is more likely to refer to an evil spirit, particularly one which has unfinished business in the mortal realm. And now, it waits for it to be released, for its mission complete, and its honor restored. Think about it. Ceruledge has the two swords, has the armor that it wore that contains the soul of El Cid, waiting for that success, refusing to truly pass on even after death, wanting for its honor to stay intact, wanting for its goal to have been succeeded. I love Ceruledge for this. I'm probably a bit biased because being Hispanic myself, not Spanish, but Hispanic. It's so cool. And such intricate little details really pull it together. Now, I know I keep saying mega forms, but let's be real. ZA's coming out, I don't know, alternate form, mega form, I don't care. Give me something that gives Ceruledge that horse. That would be sick. A fully armored horse that it sits on? Yeah, that sounds amazing. But here we close the history of El Cid and Ceruledge. Next we have Dusknoir and the Afterlife, evolving from a Dusclops by trading it with a Reaper Cloth, a Cyclopsian ghost with an antenna on its head and a big open stomach that looks like a jack-o'-lantern. The antenna is used to receive transmissions from the spirit world, which tell it who to bring to the afterlife, and then guides those who have passed away into the afterlife via its belly, and protects the living from the afterlife. Now, there are way more inspirations that make up Dusknoir that we can take into account. Visually, it's said to take after the Shochin Obake and Yamawaro, which are both yokai, but by myth, we have death itself, the Grim Reaper. But where does the Grim Reaper come from? First references being in the 15th century, meaning the 1400s, because we as humans decided we wanted to be confusing, and wielding a scythe as it reaps the souls of sinners. Each swing of the scythe bringing thousands of souls. Then, we have Kronos and Kronos in Greek mythology, which inspires death. Now, forgive me if I mix up the names. The names are so similar that it's even noted that a lot of sources mix the two up real bad. When I was actually doing the research for this, one of my sources, which is not included in there because it was giving bad information actually, mixed the two up. And then there's the other sources that I have in there that I trust way more, and it has more detail and seems more complete and proper. We have Kronos being Father Time, has a reputation as the three-headed serpent, the head of a man, head of a bull, and the head of a lion. The all-encompassing nature of time, touching all beings and realms. Now, the human head represented intelligence and the rational aspect of time, the lion head representing bravery and strength, and then the bull for fertility and creation. Through assistance of Ananke, the goddess of inevitability, and his daughter, they encircled the primordial world egg, hatched it, which marks the beginning of all existence. Then we have Kronos, the Titan father of Zeus, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, a god that carried the sickle, Cronus that is, and brief ruler of all gods and men, and just ultimately reminding me that I really need to get my hands onto Hades too soon, because I love Hades, and oh man, in addition to the myth of Cronus eating his children, as it was used in a poetic sense for time devouring all things. Nothing lasts forever. Also, there's some confusion not only between Cronus and Kronos, but we also have the whole idea of Kronos for time, Kronos for the god, and Korone for crow. I feel like something is weird there. why did they have to name everything so similarly? Now, here's the thing. Dusknoir doesn't just kill people, right? It doesn't. Sure, it rarely does it accidentally if it goes after the wrong person, but it is a farrier of souls, a psychopomp, which we talked about with the Sun Wukong story. And what better psychopomp is there than the child of Nyx itself, Charon, the ferryman of the dead, underworld spirit, guide of the dead, and transfer them across the waters to Hades in his boat. And only had a fee of a single Obolos coin, which is placed in the corpse's mouth upon arrival. Now, they did my boy wrong, right? They sat here and they depicted him as an ugly, bearded man with a crooked nose, wearing a conical hat and a tunic. Thank you, Hades developers, for making him pretty sick looking. And thank you for Nyx. And the adorableness that is Dusa. And honestly, for all of them, really. Zagreus and Thanatos forever, baby. Overall, this is more surface level, as a lot of the deeper stuff regarding all of these individuals and inspirations doesn't quite fit in here. But hey, we have Pumpkin Grim Reaper. We can all smile about that, I think. Next, we have Hydreigon and the Yamato no Orochi. Technically, Yamato no Orochi and Zme Greenwich. And a few others, possibly including other Hydras and Ghidorah from Godzilla, considering that released in 1964, and oddly enough, Hydreigon is evolved into at level 64. Could just be coincidence, though. As for Yamato no Orochi, it is known as, translation, the 8-branched serpent. Omnivorous and a gigantic serpent with 8 heads and 8 tails. It has bright red eyes and a red belly. The beast is so large that its body covers the distance of 8 valleys and 8 hills. Fir and cypress trees grow on its back, and its body is covered in moss. This big old 8-headed absolute unit of a creature that is so large it basically just has an ecosystem on its back. There's not a ton of story here other than it being incredibly destructive, and the story mainly revolves around Susanoo, the god of the storms, helping people in need by placing out 8 big old cups of sake, tempting Yamato no Orochi to come in, take drink, and when it gets too drunk, chops off all of its heads, ending its reign of destruction. As for Zmegrinish, it is a famous Slavic dragon. I really hope I'm saying its name right. If I'm not, I apologize. And it's a dragon, quote-unquote viper, with heads ranging from 3 to 6 or even 12. And all of them can breathe fire. And I quote, "He is described as being large enough to block out the sun with massive wings and even 7 tails. And with this power, he is capable of mass destruction, burning villages and kidnapping women, much like the story of other dragons, including Chudoyudo and Smokoreski. Specifically as well, his name means Serpent of the Mountains, which I believe you can't get Dino until the end of the game upon the mountain. And its color ranges from black to green, which, hold on, look at that shiny, baby, look at that, shiny. Ooh! Now, it is known as a trickster shapeshifter, and it likes to kidnap princesses, like I said, and ended up kidnapping the wrong princess, which there was a knight that came in, hit him once, and then this creature went, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, don't do it again, and I surrender. I'll never go after a princess ever again. And the knight's like, bet. Grabs princess, starts walking, and then Dragon Boy is just like, psych, and tries to fight back. Now, 3 days and 3 nights of fighting then result from this until Dobrynya, the hero, wins and puts an end to the destruction. Now, as we look back at Hydreigon, it responds to movement by attacking. This scary 3-headed Pokemon devours everything in its path. Another dex entry states, there are a slew of stories about villages that were destroyed by Hydreigon. It bites anything that moves. And finally, the 3 heads take turns sinking their teeth into the opponent. Their attacks won't slow, until their target goes down. So ultimately, it has the same behavior and similar coloration to these myths, and I'm not gonna lie, the absolute second I read green coloration, I perked up on my seat. It was 10:30 at night, and I woke up excited. I'm not gonna lie, I do a lot of my research midday and at night, often after I finish my normal job, and I just get exhausted sometimes, you know, and sleepy, and when I'm trying to fully comprehend and make connections, type it all down, and relatively memorize this information so I don't have to actually type it all down and I can look at the camera more often and be a better, you know, speak to you kind of situation, I get exhausted, right? I get tired. It is what it is, which, funny enough, I typed most of that because I couldn't think of it in my head, and, yeah. Let's move on. Next, we have Zoroark and the Kitsune, or rather the entire Zorua line and their Hisuian variants. Now, I actually almost had Ninetales here, but I find Zoroark way more fitting. Now, it does have some basis, of course, in werewolves and kabuki theater, but again, they all have a strong basis in Kitsune. Zorua being a small black fox with a red tuft on its head, when it evolves, it loses the tail and gets a much longer red hair and a ponytail. Yes, it loses its tail. The actual designer said that, hey, I'm gonna give it really long hair because it loses its tail to make up for it. Now, this can be also said about their Hisuian forms in terms of their evolution from having the tuft and a tail to just having the big old hair, but the Hisuian form's hair goes a bit wild. Now, they can transform into people, they do this when they want to get food, and scarily enough, they often replace children in doing so. There are legends of this in the Pokemon world describing the replacement of children, and to be careful, because if your child has gone quiet for quite some time, there is a chance that they have been replaced by a Zorua. Now, they can also create illusions, and the Hisuian forms actually hold such a grudge for a reason I'll reveal later, that the illusions become physical and can cause harm. Now, onto Kitsune, or translation, foxes. They are found all over Japan. They are identical to wild foxes, or at least this is how the myth goes. I realized I was talking about that as if they were real. But what if they were? Only difference would be their magical powers between foxes and the Kitsune themselves. Their cute faces also make them particularly loved. And I mean, you probably know someone who loves Kitsunes, or really loves them. Wink. Now, look, I know you fluffy tail touchers exist out there. That sounds like a terrible thing to say out loud. I scripted that part. That sounded terrible. I'm sorry. Look, I can't judge for many reasons. But there are two variations of Kitsune. You have the holy foxes, which are servants of Shinto deity Inari. The shrines of Inari are decorated with statues of the Kitsune there, providing wisdom and service to good and pious humans. I mean, there's even a whole side quest and social link revolving around a Kitsune in Persona 4. And they often are protective of humans or places, provide good luck, and ward evil spirits away. But the more common variation would be the ones that delight in mischief, pranks, and evil. They trick and possess humans, but they do keep their promises, remember friendships, and repay favors. Now, most of the tales do revolve around them punishing wicked priests, greedy merchants, and boastful drunkards. They vex their targets, creating phantom sounds and sights. Sound familiar? And I swear, sound familiar and let's take a tangent may end up becoming merch one day, because I can feel myself already beginning to say those more for clarity and for organizational purposes. Anywho, now, it will, or the Kitsune will, steal or humiliate these people publicly, and even create illusory fires and strange lights, aptly named foxfires. They can transform into many things, monsters, and even people. Sometimes for the prank, sometimes to be more nefarious, and they're even married to people by tricking them in this way. I could just, just imagine having like a 50-year marriage, kids, a cabin in the middle of the woods, everything. Your life is perfect. And as you're lying there on your deathbed, your loved one holding your hand, you tell them you lived a life worth living because of them. And then they drop the disguise and it's just a fox the entire time, and they just laugh in your face as you just and you're gone. That's so dark, but it just feels like that's what it is. There are a couple ways in which they could lose their form, such as if they get startled, they get drunk, they get careless, and their physical features give them away, like their tails or fangs, which we see in the Pokemon anime even. Now, there is also the myth of how people say mushy mush on the phone as a greeting because kitsune are unable to. This proves whether or not the person you are talking to is really them or a kitsune. And it's kind of because of the way that their mouth is shaped, apparently, that they can't say it, so it's just something that's always stuck in this big old brain of mine. But let's get back to the Zorua line. Yes, they will transform, have all these illusions and everything that I've talked about, alongside being foxes. They're prankster foxes. But even looking at its Hisuian form, we can see that the Hisuian form definitely represents the more evil version, though Unova form could still be both sides, the pious and the more evil one. It's up to, it's up to debate, whatever you wish. But what's sad is that Zorua are often driven out because of their nature and any myths. And it all starts back in Hisui. For Hisuian Zorua, a once departed soul returned to life in Hisui, derives power from resentment, which rises as energy atop its head and takes on the forms of foes. In this way, Zorua vents lingering malice. And for Hisuian Zoroark, with its disheveled white fur, it looks like an embodiment of death. Heedless of its own safety, Zoroark attacks its nemesis with a bitter energy so intense, it lacerates Zoroark's own body. It was a Zorua that was driven out, as they would in those times, as people were afraid of kitsune, of creatures that would replace them, replace their children, played pranks on them, terrorize them, and as they pushed them out, these Zorua perished in the cold of the Alabaster Icelands. And then, their grudge revived them, and it seeks revenge as a revenant. After all, the legend of the Kitsune had to start somewhere. Unfortunately, it started with Zorua, a mortal creature in the Pokemon world that liked pranks and died for it. Honestly, both phenomenal in direct storytelling, and one of my favorites because of that. Next we, Next we have Arcanine and the Chinese Guardian Lion. Regal, powerful, brave, loyal, and fluffier than a god of pillows, Arcanine. This canine, gifted from the gods, had the signature move Extreme Speed, admired for that same speed and its beauty. And it was known to have been living in volcanoes, being a very rare Pokemon to see, especially because it evolved from a Firestone. So, it is a noble creature, kind, and lovingly shares its food stored away in its fur with its young. And long story short, Hisuian isn't much different. Just has thicker fur for those cold nights. And even the Pokédex has stated that it was described in Chinese legends until, well, it was changed later and says that it comes from the east or tales from the east. But what are those Chinese legends, you ask? And I totally didn't move my finger into my sleeve, making that super unsmooth. The Foo Dogs. Or at least that's what the West calls them, when in reality they are known as Shi, or lions. Now, it is important to distinguish them by their make. You have stone ones being Shi-Shi, bronze, Tong-Shi, auspicious, Rui-Shi, fortuitous, Fu-Shi, and Buddha's lion being Fo-Shi. Statues of them guard buildings. They have a powerful physique, sharp teeth, and the aura of something that will seemingly come to life at any point, the stone stripping away to reveal an awakened creature beneath, and is regarded as an ancient and wise creature throughout a long and rich history. Now, the history does go back to the Han Dynasty that we are aware of, which was 221 BCE to 200 CE. And lions were not native to these lands, but that doesn't mean they weren't native to all of China. So we'll get back to that. Now, they may have been learned about through the Silk Route, the historic trade route. And as they were learned about and their majesticness and how powerful they were, they decided to depict them in these fashions. And they were placed in pairs and adorned tombs and shrines in order to protect those areas, standing guard in front of a queue, a pair of pillars that act as gates without doors or walls and serve as spiritual gateways for royal tombs. Now, the well-preserved male sculptures at the Gaoyi queue look like Asiatic lions that once roamed Central and Southern Asia. They had hairy manes, large paws, and slender bodies that taper towards narrow waists. And they stand on 4 legs with heads held high. Does all this sound familiar to you? Now, lion imagery of the Tang Dynasty has deep roots within the origin of Buddhist faith. Shakyamuni, prince of the Shakya tribe, was the lion of the Shakya tribe. He left for Buddhahood, and religious images were often then made. Shakyamuni sitting on a lion's throne, riding a lion, having a lion as a pet nearby, or even guarding the Buddha as he meditates, humanizing the lion and suggesting that it is now a civilized and domesticated creature, which I don't think you can't actually, to my knowledge, actually domesticate a lion. I know I've mentioned this previously in other videos, but there is the idea that you can only domesticate creatures that want to be domesticated, otherwise it's not going to happen. They tried to do it with zebras and the zebras fought back. It has to boil down to, what does the creature really want? You can, quote unquote, make something your pet, but that doesn't mean it's properly domesticated. It's just kind of making an exchange of sorts for the time being, and that could change at any moment. Now, the lion also holds similar symbolism here too. King of the beasts, dominion over all, and the roar that makes people tremble, everything tremble really, and flee or bow their heads. Said to come from confidence that can only come from unwavering faith and trust in one's heart, regardless of outside influence. Thus, the lion's roar symbolizes wisdom, fearlessness, and the divine pride in Dharma practitioners. From here, we can break away and break it down physically as well, as we get yin and yang lions, and they look a lot like our Hisu-informed friend. As a tangent though, I do have to admit, it was really funny that my initial source for all this was a freaking furniture store. Yes, I know that sounds awful, but they did display their sources, and after checking through their sources, it lined up, honestly, so that was pretty cool all in all. And if those weren't there, I was like, again, super ready to just throw every bit of information I said just now away, because then I couldn't have trusted it and just have to start over, which it happens every once in a while. Back to Arcanine though, as we get all of these pieces of the Shi as part of Arcanine's info as well. We've talked about its regal nature, its power, its demeanor, its wisdom, and the bark of majesty that causes anyone to grovel or flee from it. I'd even argue the lion dance inspired Hisuin's proclivity to dance around, as despite its bulk, it deftly feints every which way, leading opponents on a deceptively merry chase as it all but dances around them. Let's be real, this is the best puppo that there is, and it's tied to Buddha itself. For the love of everything, you may as well give it a mega form and make this bad boy an absolute divine emissary. Fire fairy type. Yes, I know it has its Hisuin form, but everyone's complained about it being fire rock and how bad of a typing that is. Look, Hisuin form looks cool. I love the whole thing, the whole moment, everything regarding the fight that you have in Legend Arceus, and I think that noble fight is arguably like one of the coolest, considering Arcanine's origins, and we still might not know literally everything that there is to know. Nevertheless, great Pokemon. Another one with very strong religious ties, oddly enough. And we're on to the next one. Kingdra and the 1,000-year Seahorse. I'm going to be real with you. I have no real idea why I decided to look into Kingdra. Honestly, my thought process with creating this video was simply, I know there are tons of myths and stories and legends and inspirations behind Pokemon, and I wanted to look into it. And so I started scrolling, and I literally scrolled from Generation 1 forward, and if I found a Pokemon in Gen 5, which I know, like, I wanted Hydreigon, I then was like, all right, let's try and pick a Pokemon from a different generation now. And I couldn't really find excessively strong ones in Gen 1, at least that interested me at the time. But then I thought, Seadra, why does it become a dragon? So I looked into it. And that's about as far as my brain really went for my reasoning behind why I looked at Seadra and Kingdra. And then I just kind of looked up Seahorse into Dragon, and it began what I consider a line of research that was very difficult, a little frustrating, and finding the true origin of it was and felt a little impossible. But here we are anyway, because it's really interesting. Now we're going to start with a tidbit from Seadra. An examination of its cells revealed the presence of a gene not found in Horsey, and it became a hot topic. Not the one where you go get your goth clothes from. Actually, you don't get a I guess you could get goth clothes from Hot Topic, but like, I get shirts like this. Like, half of the shirts I wear on this is from Hot Topic. You guys liked the other mushroom one? Hot Topic. You liked the cats in the Karma or the Yin Yang? Hot Topic. It's just the way that it is, all right? Now, the Japanese word for seahorse is Tatsuno Otoshigo, which translates to illegitimate child of a dragon. Hey, honey, what's going? Oh my God, what is that thing? Like, that's just where my brain goes. Just a poor little seahorse. After, oh no. I'm imagining a whole drama where the mother just ended up cheating, and there's just a seahorse that was born instead of it being, oh my God, a dragon or whatever. Honestly, it doesn't even have to be. It could be the father. I don't care. It doesn't matter. It's a drama. I need a drama about a seahorse coming out of, or being a part of, like, the affair of the father or the mother or whatever. I find that hilarious and stupid. Now, the myth comes from the idea that a seahorse that lives for a century will transform into a dragon. And, I mean, what do? You give Seadra the scale, a dragon scale, and trade it, which gives you Kingdra. Kingdra now being a water dragon type, and a creature so powerful that even when sleeping, its yawn can create undercurrents capable of destroying small ships. They can create large whirlpools and water spouts, and hibernate deep under the sea in caves, and have a fierce battle with Dragonites whenever they meet. Now that is on site. That is such a powerful rivalry that you just boom on site. Well, you know, that kind of reminds me of, for my D&D nerds out there, think of like blue dragons and their layers, and then the coastal living layers of the bronze dragons, which, I mean, blue for the Kingdra, and then, kind of a bronzy, tan for our Dragonite. Oddly enough, it combines nicely. And considering AbsolGames was the Dragon King of the Eastern Seas, hey, look at Sun Wukong, really, whoop, in all of this stuff today. They had authority over storms, seas, and bodies of water. Now, it makes sense for Kingdra to be based on that dragon. I really slowed down there because my brain started thinking about 100 different things at once. Now, when you have a Pokemon that is constantly causing storms and destruction and all this stuff even just by sleeping, it makes sense that Dragonite, the Pokemon that is known to save drowning Pokemon, protect them, and is known as a guardian of seas, even being adorned onto ships as that said guardian, would kind of be angry about the fact that somebody's coming in here and decided to mess things up and make more work for it. So yeah, I get why they'd be upset with each other and boom, boom, bump heads. Now, seahorses are majestic and strange-looking creatures and are present in even Greek culture, other myths revolving around kelpies, and some beliefs like those in Indonesia and Mexico that they protect money and bring prosperity. And a dragon's gotta have its hoard after all. But it doesn't stop there. There are real-life seahorses and named sea dragons. Very similar cousins of each other, sea dragons having leaf-like appendages all over for camouflage. They're brighter colored and use their tiny little fins to propel themselves slowly, letting them look like floating seaweed, while seahorses use dorsal fins on their back for propulsion and use their prehensile tails to anchor themselves, though both are rather poor at swimming. Unfortunately. Now, sea dragons live in more coastal and temperate waters of Australia, whereas there are about 50 species of seahorses around the world, mainly in tropical areas. Overall, a very simple connection and inspiration between Seadra, Kingdra, the 1,000-year seahorse, and how this Pokemon came to be. So, let's move on. Here's one that a lot of you are likely aware of, as we have Lombre and the Kappa. Now, not only known for their fantastic dancing, or even the leaf on their head serving as a sombrero, we have the Lotan line, but again, more specifically, Lombre, as not only do they have the Mexican mariachi band inspirations, but also the yokai Kappa. Let's take a tangent though, because every single time I hear Kappa, I think of Kappa Mikey. Do you remember that? Please tell me there's somebody that remembers that Nickelodeon trash fire. I don't know. I watched it all the time when I was younger, and in my memory, it's golden. Yes, it's stupid and full of tropes. I remember Yes Man and Lily Mew, which was the company for it, and like how they made fun of so many franchises and those tropes, like when everybody would get their, like, the old, like, the old anime tropes, like the expressions, like their heads get bigger and everything like that, and then Kappa Mikey just sits there, he's like trying to like do the same thing, but he's American, so he can't do it. Quality of animation wasn't the greatest, but they had fun with it, and it had the spirits that, you know, of what they were trying to do. And I want to watch it again so bad, but somewhere deep inside of me, I fear just how bad it might really be, or even how controversial it might actually be, and that the jokes that stand in my head will be ruined forever. I just remembered Oxnard. Isn't Oxnard the big guy with the blue hair? I think so. That was his best friend. I don't remember. I remember all their images in my head, and even like the Pikachu of the group, the little purple guy, and who was like smarter than the rest of them and way more serious outside of when they were filming. Either way, at least like, oh gosh, actually, you know what? At least Zim came back, Invader Zim came back with Enter the Florpus, and woo! That was phenomenal. I mean, everybody's still making the joke of, not scientifically possible! Like, and it was true to its original form, and gosh, that show was really dark. Like, really dark. Because, remember the Oregon Harvest episode? Yeah, that apparently claimed by the guy who did it. There was a guy who did the same thing to somebody in real life, saying that they got the idea from Invader Zim. I think it's just an excuse for him to pin the blame on something else. And Invader Zim was an easy target. Anywho, tangents over. Lombre itself is known to have a mischievous spirit. If it spots an angler, it will tug on the fishing line to interfere. It is nocturnal, and Lombre's entire body is covered in this like slippery, slimy film. It feels horribly unpleasant to be touched by this Pokemon's hands, and Lombre is often mistaken for a human child. I don't know what children you see gangling about, running around with a dish on its head and greenish blue skin, but please put down the kale. It's clearly changing the color of your family's skin. I don't know. What are you eating to make your children look anything like this? Now, additional dex entries do state old folklore in Kitakami tells of a mischievous child who is reborn as a Pokemon, and it prefers waterfronts with plentiful food. It becomes nocturnal, so it wouldn't have to compete for food with bird Pokemon. Now let's waltz our way on over to some info regarding the Kappa. Another quote. The Japanese Kappa is one of Japan's best-known folklore characters, a type of Japanese yokai, which is a Japanese ghost, monster, or spirit that lives in the land in places such as swamps, rivers, and forests. This water deity is a scaly aquatic creature that can be found in the bodies of water and is said to be the size of a child. Do I say now? Do I say it later? Should I say the phrase? Sound familiar? Now, Kappa translates to water person. They are excellent swimmers, are believed to have magical powers, even bewitching people to do their bidding. Originally depicted to be ugly, they are changing over the years and in the modern day to be far cuter. And the story of them originates all the way back to at least the Edo period. Every single time I say Edo, I think back to the comment, the lovely comment that did correct me in a very nice way, so I don't say Edo. Anywho, the exact origins of the Kappa, though, are unknown. It may have actually even been based on the Japanese giant salamander. Now, they live in rivers and other bodies of water, waiting to prey on their unsuspecting victims, generally said to be green with scaly skin like a lizard or amphibian. They have also been spotted with long claws, webbed feet, and a turtle-like shell on their back. I'm holding back. I'm holding back the innate urge to say, you know what. Yeah, so, this next part, I'm just gonna say ad verbatim also. I know I'm quoting a lot, and I'm looking over after the script, but I don't want to mess this up. There's a lot of detail, and it's rather to the point. So, I'm gonna read this out verbatim because it made me pause when I initially read it. First and foremost, the Kappa is actually a demon. It is said that they are obsessed with a small ball that contains a person's soul, found hidden in the person's anus. Yeah, Japanese myths call this the Shirikodama. To fuel this theory, comes from the stories that the Kappa's victims are found torn in that area as this water demon sucked out the Shirikodama. I just, man, I don't even know what to say to that. Don't you worry. Let's say this. Don't you worry, all right? If you catch one, if you manage to catch one, it will teach you how to irrigate your land if you're a farmer, or teach you how to set broken bones. Don't know how those are related, but whatever. And you might be asking yourself, well, how do you defeat one? Just in case I ever encounter one of these soul-sucking creatures. I hate it. Well, you get it out the water. You don't go into the water. It's a swift swimmer. It goes fast. It's amazing. So you don't go in the water. You get it to come out of the water, all right? Then you do something. You get it to bow to you, because for some reason, this thing is overly polite. So if you get it to bow, it'll do a nice, slow, deep bow. And as it does so, it takes far too long, and the water that's in its rain dish spills from its head. And then, it's as helpless as someone with ADHD in a room riddled with red buttons being told not to touch any of them, or a nuclear bomb will go off. I'm not gonna lie. This is gonna get dark. It's gonna get dark, and I'm sorry. But when I first thought of that, like, that part was written down, but the thought that went through my head initially was I actually imagined a baby under a Fat Man bomb, and I almost just flat out said it's as helpless as a baby under a Fat Man bomb. And I giggled and laughed to myself for a while because internet comedy is just something else. Alternatively, if you like cucumbers, just eat some cucumbers. They ward off water demons for some reason. Maybe because they trap water. I don't understand that. And I think the mystery of it makes it more entertaining to me. Though, if someone says it in the comments, the reason why, yeah, sure, why not? Teach people. I learn from you just as much as you learn from me sometimes. Now, let's look at Lombre once more. Physically, they are similar, even having the wonderful rain dish that I mentioned earlier. And actually, the rain dish ability giving it health every turn that it's raining. It makes sense considering that when the Kappa exits the water, if it doesn't have rain water in its dish, it actually grows weak and immobilizes. So it makes sense that giving it water, or at least giving Lombre water, would actually restore health for it. Swift Swim is another ability that would represent the great swimming of the Kappa, and then On Tempo for the mariachi dancing unrelated to the Kappa, and eventually leads you into Ludicolo. Every time I think of Ludicolo, I think of this scene. Now, very fun, and it was at this point in my research that I just got really happy and giddy, as I often do. So I just wanted to share that. Thank you again for encouraging this and allowing me to go through this. Your support means the world to me. And on to the next one. We have Flygon and the Singing Sands. If you hear the sands singing, you're in the presence of Flygon, an adorable dragon deserving of a mega form, as we all agree, and potentially the idea that it should have maybe been a bug dragon type, but you know, whatever, understandable. I call it Goggles. I call all of them Goggles, and I love them so much. Now, it does have flat wings that are like desert sails, and a lithe body. This creature kicks up sandstorms to hide itself and teams up with Crocodile to hunt prey. Yeah, Crocodile, having eyes that can see better than normal vision even through a sandstorm, is known as the bully of the sands and is able to rip apart a car with its chompers. It teams up with Flygon as Flygon kicks up the sandstorm, hiding them both. As they travel together, the Crocodile takes down the prey with ease, as it is an apex predator, and then they share their meal together. If you hear a singing sound in the deserts, that's its wings beating. And that's the only thing that can be heard in these sandstorms. Yeah, that's terrifying. I'm not gonna lie. Especially since it sounds like a woman's singing. But this is a real life phenomenon. So, not really a myth. I'm sorry. Oh, goodness me. I'm so sorry. I clickbaited you. There's not actually 10 myths. I'm so sorry. Not really. Let's be real here. Yeah, it's fun. But it is inspired by something you can personally witness. I'm gonna quote a lot here, so bear with me, as once again, I feel like I can't put this any better than the individuals who have studied this phenomenon firsthand. It is described in Nevada Magazine. Screaming, roaring, whistling, squeaking, singing, all can be used to describe the sounds of Sand Mountain's sands. I traveled to experience this puzzling, impressive natural phenomenon some 30 miles east of Fallon, along Highway 50, where the expansive mountain is located. The emission of sound is caused by naturally blowing wind, but can also be created by movement, such as in creating mini avalanches while walking downhill. Things like this just blow me away. No pun intended on that, but like, it's just mystical. This phenomenon, which, funny enough, Flygon is considered the mystic Pokemon. Now, I'll quote from the same magazine, as I, again, don't think I can say it any better. Scientific articles proclaim that the sounds and vibrations may be caused by heat, friction, gases trapped between layers, and possibly electrical influences. The billions of smooth, pure white grains of quartz, silica, feldspar, and magnetite, so uniform in size and shape, create the voices. It is speculated that the conditions to produce singing are special and limited. The wind must be able to rework the sand grains over long reaches of transport to create highly polished round grains of sand containing silica that are 0.1 to 0.5 inches in diameter, and certain levels of humidity around 0.01% moisture are required, as is friction and compression of air. Only dry sand sings. Wet grains of sand stick together and make no sound. This acoustical energy is not completely understood. Continuing, the Song of the Sands is an eerie, vibrating moan or a thunderous roar, changing with the seasons, humidity, wind direction, and variations of disturbance. Some say it sounds like rolling thunder or a vibration like a jet. Others hear a musical instrument, a violin, bass, tambourine, or zither. its pitch can be up to 105 decibels and last several minutes. Let's put the 105 decibels into context. To give you an idea, when we look at decibels, at 150 you have eardrum rupture. You have jet takeoffs, which are at this level when you are 25 meters away from it. This is all from Purdue, by the way. I realize I didn't say where my source was for this one out loud. But you also, if we take it down a couple notches, when you are 305 meters away from a jet, that is at 100 decibels. Now, this can cause serious damage, which is more possible in 8 hours of exposure. Other things that might help you understand what this level is the power lawnmower, motorcycles, farm tractors, jackhammers, garbage trucks, a Boeing 707, and a number of other planes or aircrafts as well. So just kind of keep that in mind when you think of how loud these sands are. While there's nothing more that I feel like I could say about Flygon and the Singing Sands, it makes me want to one day see things firsthand for this research that I do. It's all in good and well to have these accredited sources that I can reference to and look at and say, here's what I learned, here's how it relates to Pokemon. Please eat this with your brain and increase the grooves that are now forming within that sponge of meat inside of your cranium. I appreciate it. But like, it would be something else, in my opinion, to have that opportunity to go to some places and museums and everything, knowing that it's like I can afford to do so through YouTube one day, hopefully, and talk to more experts in the field in person for my notes rather than just looking for stuff online. It makes it feel more special to me, and that would just be a dream. But let's talk about our final entry for the day. Milotic and the Ugly Duckling. From Feebas to Milotic, Feebas is considered an incredibly ugly Pokemon. Now, it says shabby, but like, let's be real, they want to say ugly. And it's considered incredibly shabby, even by other Pokemon, to the point where no other Pokemon even tries to eat or fight it. Not even the very pugilistic Crawdons that will fight and throw out any Pokemon from its home, except for maybe other Corphish, Crawdons, or Feebas. Now, the Feebas is incredibly ridiculed when it is given attention. It eats whatever it can, but is also considered incredibly tough and filled with vitality, which makes it a subject of research in the Pokemon world as to how that is the case. And some people apparently like to collect Feebas for who they are. Now, they do evolve by trading with the Prism scale or by having over 170 beauty and leveling up. And then it becomes Milotic, said to be the most beautiful of all Pokemon, inspiring artists and calming the angry feelings and ending arguments through energy it releases. It can also float through the air and it lives at the bottom of large lakes. Milotic also has bases in sea serpents, mermaids, oarfish, hand fans for its tail end, lampreys and hagfishes for its gills, and stained glass, even potentially Venus, goddess of love and beauty. But let's get into the original Ugly Duckling story. I won't lie to you, the tale of the Ugly Duckling was so incredibly depressing that I went from like, I am sad about this and this is hurting me, to circling back around and kind of being a little funny with just how depressing it was. I don't know. I'll be honest with you, I'm somebody who has what is actually described by my doctor, change anxiety, change depression. So it only occurs when big changes happen, even if they're good. So I mean, I don't know. Does that give me an excuse to find it funny? No. Is it still funny to me anyway? Because it keeps tightening this string, and eventually I just kind of was like, all right, whatever. This is funny how depressing this actually is. it is what it is, right? Anywho, it still made me a little sad here and there, so don't you worry. My empathy factor is still very much here, but I'm gonna be honest with you guys, as I always am. This ugly duckling was born, right? It was born late. It had a different, like, egg going on here, and when it was born, it was larger in size, and it was ugly as per other ducks' standards. Now, originally, it was defended by its mother, as the ducks in the area, the ones that ran it, were like, what's wrong with you? What is this thing? You kill it. I'm not even joking. The story flat out had these other ducks be like, ew, you shouldn't be alive. And it's like, oh my gosh. And again, the ugly duckling was defended by the mother originally, being like, hey, it's a drake, which I found out means male duck. It is bigger and uglier than the rest, but it's competent. My son is competent. They can swim better than the other ducks and was more hardy than the others. And nevertheless, the head ducks were just like, I don't care. Nothing that ugly should be allowed to live. And it's just like, even the siblings at one point go, haha, we wish the cat did eat your egg. And the mother eventually is just like, I wish you were never born. It's like, at what point do you just stop being like, oh, this is laughably painful? Oof. I don't know. That might also say something about my character, considering, like, I make a lot of jokes and so on when I'm not feeling super great in order to try and get a laugh out of someone else or try to knock myself out of a bad mood. So, I don't know. But the ugly duckling then flies off, or rather runs off, not really being able to fly yet, and ends up around different fowl. They also bully him and is just like, yeah, sure, you don't really fit in, you don't look good. And then you hear boom, and one of these other fowl, I believe they were ducks, hits the ground, or rather head into the water, and then boom, another one goes down, and then you hear as a dog, that's not really much of a dog sound, but a dog comes out and grabs another one of them. And throughout all of this chaos and these other, and the perishing away, the ugly duckling is left completely alone, ignored. And even the duckling itself was like, wow, I guess I'm too ugly in order for me to even be considered good enough to kill. And, sound familiar? Now, there is a point as it goes off where it sees some swans, and it looks up at them flying high in the sky, and it thinks to itself, I wish I was them. But it doesn't, like, envy them. It's not green with envy, wishing bad upon them. It's admiration. It wants to be like them. It wants to soar high into the sky and be ever so beautiful. But it's not. And it's just an ugly duck. And it can't even fly yet. So the duckling goes off. And the writer, Hans Christian, even says, yeah, I won't tell you just how bad it gets and how terrible and sad the winter was, because it just gets worse. Horrible, terrible, no good, very bad season. Now, he says, he's like, I'll spare you the pain, okay? Our ducky here basically dies, frozen by the winter. But a young peasant boy walks on over and is just like, oh no, picks him up, brings him home to his family, and revives our ugly duckling, making it okay. But because of its mistreatment and what it's had to do and deal with, it freaks out, panicked, swings its big old freaking wings, and just like, it's just struggling, going all over the place and trying to escape until eventually it leaves the home and ends up actually flying to a nearby pond. And it's gonna get real sad as it gets into the water, goes up to the swans, and as it bows his head, goes, kill me. And as he looks down into the water, he sees his own reflection and sees a beautiful swan. And he's embarrassed. He realizes, wait, that's me. he's embarrassed by his request and everything. And honestly, let me just read the last chunk of the story. But what did he see in the clear stream below? His own image, no longer a dark gray bird, ugly and disagreeable to look at, but a graceful and beautiful swan. To be born in a duck's nest in a farmyard is of no consequence to a bird if it is hatched from a swan's egg. He now felt glad at having suffered sorrow and trouble because it enabled him to enjoy so much better all the pleasure and happiness around him. For the great swans swam around the newcomer and stroked his neck with their beaks as a welcome. Into the garden presently came some little children and threw bread and cake into the water. "See," cried the youngest, "there is a new one." And the rest were delighted and ran to their father and mother, dancing and clapping their hands and shouting joyously, "There's another swan, come, a new one has arrived." They then threw more bread and cake into the water and said, "The new one is the most beautiful of all. He's so young and pretty." And the old swans bowed their heads before him. Then he felt quite ashamed and hid his head under his wing, for he did not know what to do. He was so happy and yet not at all proud. He had been persecuted and despised for his ugliness, and now he heard them say he was the most beautiful of all birds. Even the elder tree bent down its boughs into the water before him, and the sun shone warm and bright. Then he rustled his feathers, curved his slender neck, and cried joyfully. From the depths of his heart, I never dreamed of such happiness as this, while I was an ugly duckling. Honestly, I don't remember the story being this way, and I like it more than I thought. It wasn't about being beautiful in order to please his original home. It was about him finding his true home, and there's a part of that I take personally, not in like the physical appearance thing, but the idea of he struggled in the past incredibly, pushing and punching and persevering despite everything. And now he gets to fully enjoy and recognize what it has meant to suffer, as he has now been able to enjoy or begin to enjoy his new gift. And I might be a little biased because Lilo and Stitch is also my favorite Disney movie, and well, this story is a part of it. It's, you know, finding your family. And geez, hold on. Like, I'll be real. I even have a little scrump here from like my sister. You know, look at the little scrump. I have no idea. She probably thinks that I don't have this anymore. Guess what? I do, you nerd. Love you. I have no idea if she's gonna watch this, but whatever. Nevertheless, the hardiness, the beauty, the perseverance, all of this translates from the ugly duckling to Feebas, because it was never a duck or truly a fish, but respectively a swan, or in Feebas's case, a beautiful sea serpent of an entirely different species. Pokemon come in many different shapes and sizes, and even if sometimes their designs are a little off in old or new games, there's almost always a special background to them, plucked from myth, legends, history, or the land itself. And I think that makes this all the more beautiful and interesting to look into. Thank you so much for your time, and to my YouTube and Patreon members. And of course, you, my dear viewer. I can't do this without your viewership after all. If you enjoyed, subscribe, share the video, and name some Pokemon you would love to see covered in a deep dive collection like this. With that, as always, thank you so much for watching. Don't do anything I want to do. Don't do anything I would do. Please be nice to each other. I love you, and I'll see you next time. Bye!